the quantum and the mind. What if the thoughts you're having right now, the ones that race through your mind, the ones that seem to flicker in and out of awareness, are not just confined to the soft, wet matter of your brain? What if those thoughts are already etched into the very fabric of the universe itself, waiting for you to perceive? What if consciousness is not something that emerges from the brain, but something that interacts with the quantum world, woven into the deepest structures of reality? It sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? A mystery so profound that it seems out of reach. Something more akin to myth than to the cold, rational world of physics. But before you dismiss this thought, let's pause for a moment. What if space itself, the very backdrop of existence, is not empty at all? What if it is not the inert void we've imagined it to be, but a teeming, pulsating field of energy, a quantum vacuum filled with possibility, fluctuations, and waves of potential? In the 20th century, physics opened up an entirely new perspective on the nature of space. We learned that the vacuum of space is not a mere void, but a dynamic, energetic sea, constantly fluctuating, constantly alive. This is the strange world of the quantum vacuum, a realm where particles pop in and out of existence, where the very fabric of space is never truly still. In this quantum reality, everything is connected, everything is in motion, and everything is potential. So let's take a step back and ask, could this quantum vacuum, this foundation of the universe, be more intimately tied to consciousness than we've ever imagined? Could the mind in some way not be a prisoner of the brain, but a part of this vast quantum realm, intertwined with the very stuff of existence itself? This idea may seem distant, but it's not without foundation. Let's consider for a moment the brain's role in all of it. Our brains are undeniably powerful, a web of billions of neurons firing in intricate patterns, processing information, creating thoughts, memories, emotions, and awareness. And yet, with all the advanced imaging techniques and years of study, scientists are still left with the profound, hard problem of consciousness. How do those firing neurons translate into the subjective experience of being? Why should the firing of a neuron give rise to the sensation of seeing red, or feeling joy, or thinking about tomorrow? Why, at the most basic level, does awareness exist at all? What if consciousness is not solely confined to the brain, but is something much more expansive? What if, instead of emerging from the brain's complexity, the mind itself is an active participant in the quantum world, perhaps even woven into the quantum vacuum? Imagine for a moment that the thoughts we experience are not born inside the skull, but are rather interacting with the quantum field like ripples on the surface of an ocean that extend beyond the horizon. If the quantum vacuum is teeming with energy, with fluctuations that have no boundaries in space or time, what if our consciousness is tapping into this sea of possibility? What if, rather than being isolated in our skulls, our awareness is connected to something vast, universal, and ever-present, something that transcends space and time, a field that binds everything together? This brings us to the fundamental contrast. Between the brain-bound view of thought and a more radical speculative perspective, the idea that thoughts could exist beyond the confines of the brain. In the traditional view, the brain is the birthplace of thought, a complex organ that generates consciousness from the intricate network of neurons. Thoughts arise from the electrochemical activity in our brain, the firing of neurons, the synapses connecting them. But what if this view is incomplete? What if the quantum world, with its strange entanglements, superpositions, and non-locality, offers a broader framework in which thoughts are not simply generated in our brains, but are part of a greater cosmic process? Take, for example, the concept of non-locality in quantum mechanics. In the quantum world, particles can be entangled, meaning that their states are directly connected regardless of the distance between them. A particle in one part of the universe can instantaneously influence a particle on the other side faster than the speed of light, defying the classical laws of space and time. Now imagine that consciousness itself is entangled with the fabric of the quantum field, not constrained by the limitations of the brain, but interconnected with the entire universe. What if the thoughts you're experiencing right now, the ones that seem so personal, so immediate, are not just local phenomena, but echoes of a larger cosmic process. This speculative notion challenges the very essence of how we view the mind. If consciousness were connected to the quantum vacuum, we might find that our individual thoughts are not isolated bursts of neural activity, but ripples interacting with an underlying field of information. Just as quantum particles are both waves and particles, thoughts might be both individual and universal, bound by the laws of the quantum world, and yet uniquely expressed through each individual mind. The quantum vacuum, with its constant fluctuations, could be seen as a kind of medium in which thoughts are not generated but transmitted. Just as electromagnetic waves travel through space, what if consciousness is a phenomenon that travels through the quantum field, using the brain as a kind of antenna or filter, but not solely dependent on it? The brain, in this view, would not be the origin of consciousness, but a receiver tuning into a broader cosmic field of awareness. And yet, even as we explore these profound possibilities, we must acknowledge the limits of current science. We are not yet able to directly measure or observe the interactions between consciousness and the quantum world. The tools to study this connection are still in their infancy. We cannot, as of now, directly detect the quantum vacuum's influence on the mind, and we do not yet have the framework to unify quantum mechanics and consciousness in a way that allows for empirical testing. This is the paradox of the quantum mind, a tantalizing idea, yet one that eludes direct observation. For all the elegance of the theory, it remains speculative, on the edge of what we know, in a space between imagination and evidence. But that does not make it any less compelling. The idea that consciousness is intertwined with the quantum world offers a glimpse of something vast, something beyond our everyday experience of reality, a deeper cosmic order in which mind and matter are not separate but woven together in an intricate dance. Perhaps in the end, the greatest mystery lies not in finding definitive answers, but in the act of asking these questions. What if the search for the origins of consciousness, the search for the connection between mind and the quantum realm, is itself a journey into the heart of existence? What if, just as we once believed the Earth was flat until we saw the curvature of the planet, we are on the verge of discovering a new dimension of reality, one that challenges our most fundamental assumptions about the mind. At the heart of this exploration is a simple yet profound truth. We are aware, we are conscious, we think, we question, and the search for why and how we experience the world is as much a part of our existence as the thoughts themselves. Whether consciousness is confined to the brain or interwoven with the quantum fabric of the universe, the fact that we are asking the question is a gift, a step in a journey that may one day reveal a truth as deep as the cosmos itself. And so, we ask, could our thoughts, our awareness, be not just a product of the brain, but a glimpse into the deepest workings of the universe? Could consciousness itself be part of the quantum fabric, woven into the very structure of reality, a universe of possibility? When we think of a vacuum, we often imagine a perfect emptiness, a vast, hollow nothingness, devoid of matter and energy. It's a simple, familiar image, the vacuum of space, the void between stars, the absence of anything. But what if this image is completely wrong? What if the so-called empty space is not empty at all, but alive with possibility, brimming with hidden potential? This is the astonishing truth revealed by quantum theory. The quantum vacuum, the very fabric of space, is not a void at all. It is, in fact, a dynamic sea of fluctuating energy fields. A quantum vacuum is not empty, it is filled with a continuous dance of particles and antiparticles constantly appearing and disappearing in a chaotic ballet. These particles are not merely theoretical constructs, they are real, physical phenomena that exist momentarily before vanishing back into the vacuum. This is known as quantum fluctuation, and it's one of the most mind-bending revelations in modern physics. At the heart of this idea is a concept known as the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. This principle tells us that certain property of particles like position and momentum cannot be precisely determined simultaneously. This uncertainty, far from being a flaw in our measurements, is a fundamental feature of nature. It allows particles to exist in a state of indeterminacy, existing in multiple states at once, and it gives rise to the very fluctuations that characterize the quantum vacuum. In essence, the vacuum of space is anything but empty. It's a roiling sea of energy, with particles spontaneously coming into existence only to annihilate each other in a flash, leaving behind no trace. This eternal dance of creation and annihilation happens at all scales constantly and on such a minuscule time scale that it's beyond our ability to observe directly. But the consequences of this activity are very real. It affects the behavior of atoms, the formation of stars, and even the nature of light itself. So if space itself is not empty but a dynamic, active field of fluctuating energy, what does this mean for consciousness? Could this quantum vacuum be more than just a backdrop to the universe, a silent stage for particles to play their part? Could consciousness too tap into this vast sea of energy, drawing from it in ways we've never imagined? What if our minds are not isolated from this cosmic field, but are somehow connected to it, interacting with this ever-present energy in ways we have yet to understand? Let's take a moment to grasp the magnitude of what we're discussing. In classical physics, the vacuum was indeed considered empty. Space was simply the absence of matter, a cold, inert container for the universe. But quantum mechanics shattered this simple idea. It revealed that space itself is teeming with energy that is so fundamental to the structure of the universe that it underpins every interaction, every process, every phenomenon we observe. The quantum vacuum is the ground from which the entire universe springs, a wellspring of infinite potential. Imagine for a moment that the quantum vacuum is like a vast, invisible ocean, its waves of energy moving through the very fabric of space and time. Every particle that comes into existence, every force that plays out in the universe is like a ripple on the surface of this ocean. What if consciousness itself is like a wave in this ocean, resonating with the quantum fluctuations of the vacuum? What if our awareness, our thoughts, our perceptions, our sense of being is not just a localized process in the brain, but a resonance with this deeper cosmic field? To explore this, we must first contrast the classical view of the vacuum with the quantum vacuum. In the classical view, space is a passive, empty void. It's a simple stage on which matter and energy play their roles. But in the quantum view, the vacuum is an active, dynamic space. It's a field, a potential, not an emptiness. It's filled with the possibility of creation, constantly fluctuating with energy, constantly shifting between different states of potential. This idea transforms our understanding of space itself. Rather than seeing it as a dead backdrop to the drama of the universe, we see it as a living, breathing entity, full of possibility. Now let's zoom in on the quantum vacuum's role in the universe. Quantum field theory, one of the cornerstones of modern physics, tells us that every fundamental particle is actually a quantum field, a field that permeates all of space and whose energy fluctuates throughout. These fields are not just localized at a point in space, they are spread across the entire universe, filling every nook and cranny of existence. When we think of particles, we tend to imagine discrete objects like little marbles bouncing around. But in the quantum view, particles are really just excitations of these fields, tiny ripples or disturbances in the underlying fabric of space. And just as particles are ripples in quantum fields, perhaps consciousness is a ripple to a ripple in the quantum vacuum. What if our mind, our awareness, are not generated solely within our brains, but are somehow connected to this vast cosmic field? What if our thoughts, our emotions, even our very sense of being arise from our interaction with this field of potential? The idea that consciousness might be linked to the quantum vacuum is a revolutionary one, and it opens up possibilities that we are only beginning to explore. Let's consider the implications. If consciousness were to tap into the quantum vacuum, It would mean that we are not isolated individual beings operating on a separate plane of existence. We would be part of a vast, interconnected whole, a network of consciousness stretching across time and space. This idea aligns with ancient philosophies that saw the mind as universal, as interconnected with the fabric of the cosmos. It suggests that our awareness is not just a byproduct of our brain activity, but a fundamental aspect of reality itself. But what does this mean for our understanding of reality? If consciousness is somehow woven into the quantum vacuum, then perhaps the very nature of reality is not fixed, but fluid, open to influence from the observer. We have seen hints of this in quantum mechanics, where the act of measurement can collapse the wave function, forcing particles into definite states. What if the consciousness of the observer plays a role not just in measurement, but in shaping reality itself, shaping the quantum field in ways we cannot yet fully comprehend? The contrast between the classical and quantum views of the vacuum is stark. In the classical view, the vacuum is a passive void, empty of substance and meaning. In the quantum view, the vacuum is an active, dynamic field full of potential and deeply connected to the very structure of the universe. In the classical view, consciousness is bound by the limits of the brain. In the quantum view, consciousness could be linked to the quantum field itself, resonating with the deeper energies of the cosmos, perhaps even shaping reality as it unfolds. This is the essence of the mystery. The quantum vacuum is not merely empty space, but a dynamic, active space filled with the potential for creation, interaction, and awareness. And if consciousness is indeed connected to this field, it raises questions about the very nature of mind, reality, and existence. Could it be that our awareness is not just a product of neurons firing, but a fundamental aspect of the quantum universe itself, resonating with the vibrations of the cosmos? As we move forward, we will explore how this idea intersects with the cutting-edge frontiers of science, from quantum biology to the possible connection between consciousness and quantum mechanics. But for now, let's pause and reflect on the most profound idea of all, that the universe at its deepest level is not a mechanical machine, but a living, interconnected web of energy, and that our consciousness may be woven into that web in ways we are only beginning to understand. What is consciousness? The hard problem. What does it feel like to be you, to experience the warmth of the sun on your skin, the taste of food in your mouth, the quiet hum of your own thought? These moments, rich with color and texture, seem so personal, so immediate. And yet, when we try to explain them, we run into a profound paradox. How can all of this subjective experience, the very essence of being, arise from something as cold, as mechanical, as the firing of neurons in the brain? This is the hard problem of consciousness, a question first posed by philosopher David Chalmers in the 1990s. It's one of the greatest puzzles in both philosophy and science. How does subjective experience emerge from objective matter? In other words, how do physical processes, the interaction of molecules and cells in the brain, give rise to the rich inner world of thoughts, sensations, and feelings we know as consciousness? Science has made incredible strides in understanding the brain's architecture. We can map which regions light up when we think, feel, or see. We can measure the neural correlates of consciousness, the brain activity associated with particular conscious states. But none of this answers the hard problem. Even as we uncover more about how the brain works, we are left with a critical question. Why should the firing of neurons, the exchange of electrical signals between brain cells, feel like anything at all? In neuroscience, the dominant view is that consciousness is a product of the brain, a byproduct of neural processing. The brain's intricate network of neurons firing in specific patterns generates awareness, the thinking, feeling self that we experience. This is the emergent property model, one that views consciousness as an outcome of complexity. In this view, consciousness arises not from any single neuron, but from the interaction of billions of cells, forming networks that process information, make decisions, and give rise to experience. It's like the flow of water in a river. While the riverbed may guide the flow, the water itself is what we see and interact with. This view has led to impressive advances in neuroscience, with technologies like functional MRI and EEG allowing us to map brain activity and understand its relationship to behavior. We can pinpoint which areas of the brain are involved in certain tasks, from recognizing faces to making decisions. The evidence for this brain-based view of consciousness is overwhelming. We can also manipulate brain activity, inducing or eliminating specific experiences, from stimulating the sensory cortex to generating hallucinations, to using drugs to alter the state of awareness. But despite all these advances, something crucial remains unexplained. Why does this processing feel like something? Why is there an inequality to consciousness, the redness of red, the sharpness of pain, the sweetness of a melody? This subjective what-it's-like experience, known as qualia, cannot be accounted for by the firing of neurons alone. Neuroscience can tell us what happens in the brain when we experience something, but it cannot explain why that particular brain activity gives rise to the vivid inner world we all know and feel. The hard problem exposes a fundamental gap in our understanding. We can measure the brain's activities, we can observe the neural correlates of consciousness, but we still cannot explain why it feels the way it does to be you or me, why our experiences are more than just physical processes, why they are personal. And herein lies the problem. No matter how much we study the brain, we still don't know why or how it generates awareness. As we reach the limits of materialism, the question becomes, could consciousness be more than a product of the brain? Could it be something more mysterious, more profound, something that transcends our physical understanding? One possibility is that consciousness is not merely emergent, the result of complex interactions between neurons, but fundamental. In this view, consciousness is not something that arises from the brain's complexity, but something that exists independently, a force or field that interacts with the brain. Just as electromagnetic fields govern the interactions of charged particles, perhaps consciousness is woven into the very fabric of reality, and the brain is simply one place where it expresses itself. This view brings us to the heart of panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is not confined to humans or animals, but is a fundamental feature of all matter. According to panpsychism, consciousness exists on a continuum throughout the universe. From the simplest particles to the most complex brains, every particle, every atom, has some degree of consciousness, even if it's as rudimentary as the experience of being. In this view, consciousness is not a latecomer in evolution, but a constant, underlying property of reality. Some modern physicists have entertained similar ideas. Quantum physicist David Bohm, for example, suggested that consciousness might be a deeper, non-local property of the universe, woven into the very fabric of space-time. Erwin Schrödinger, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, famously said, "The total number of minds in the universe is one." According to Bohm and Schrödinger, consciousness might not be confined to individual brains, but could be a universal property of the universe, a collective mind that underlies all existence. If this is true, then the brain is not the producer of consciousness, but rather a receiver, a kind of antenna that tunes into a broader cosmic field of awareness. This could explain the deep mystery of how consciousness arises, not as a byproduct of neural activity, but as a fundamental interaction between the brain and the universe's quantum field. This radical idea is one of the reasons the hard problem remains so difficult to address. It challenges the very assumptions of how we think about reality itself. If consciousness is fundamental, then it is not an isolated phenomenon tied only to the brain, but something universal, something that permeates the entire cosmos. This view suggests that our individual awarenesses are like bubbles on the surface of a vast oceanic consciousness. Our subjective experiences are not isolated, they are connected to the whole. But how does this fit with current scientific theories? Many neuroscientists are reluctant to entertain such ideas because they seem speculative, untestable. The scientific method relies on observable data, and consciousness as a universal field cannot be measured directly, not yet. The question of whether consciousness is fundamental to reality or whether it emerges from complex interactions in the brain remains open. The The contrast between these views is stark. On one side, we have the brain-generated consciousness model, a view supported by decades of empirical data and technological advancements in neuroscience. This view paints consciousness as a sophisticated byproduct of biological process, something that emerges from the brain's complexity. On the other side, we have the idea that consciousness is fundamental, that awareness is a force in the universe, intertwined with the very fabric of existence. This contrast between the brain as the birthplace of consciousness and consciousness as an inherent part of reality is what makes the hard problem so profound. It challenges everything we know about the mind, the brain, and the nature of reality itself. So where does this leave us? The hard problem of consciousness remains unsolved, not for lack of effort, but because it cuts to the heart of the human. Experience the subjective personal nature of being. No theory, no matter how elegant, can fully explain why consciousness feels the way it does. Whether consciousness is brain-generated or something more mysterious, whether it's an emergent property of neurons or a fundamental field woven into the fabric of the cosmos, the fact that we can ask these questions is itself profound. In the end, the hard problem might not be a question to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. The search for answers to consciousness is a search for meaning itself, a search that transcends science, philosophy, and the mind. It is a journey that will continue to unfold with each new discovery and each new question revealing new layers of the mind and the universe. Perhaps in the deepest sense, the mystery of consciousness is not a problem to be solved, but an invitation to experience the cosmos in its entirety. To ponder consciousness is to ponder existence itself, to stand on the edge of the unknown and to embrace the wonder that comes with not knowing. Consciousness and the microtubules. What if consciousness is not just an emergent property of the brain's complexity, a product of billions of neurons firing in sync, but the result of something far more mysterious? What if our thoughts, our awareness, arise not from simple neural interactions, but from quantum processes occurring within the brain itself? This radical idea comes from an unlikely pair. Sir Roger Penrose, the renowned mathematical physicist who helped shape our understanding of black holes and general relativity, and Dr. Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist with a fascination for the strange world of quantum biology. Together they proposed a theory that could change everything we know about consciousness. Their theory, known as Orch-OR, orchestrated objective reduction, suggests that consciousness emerges not from the brain's electrical activity, but from quantum processes occurring inside the brain's microtubule, the tiny protein structures found in neurons. At the heart of Orch-OR is the idea that quantum coherence, a state where particles are in multiple states at once, their properties entangled, plays a critical role in cognition. While traditional neuroscience has focused on the brain's electrochemical activity, Orch-OR suggests that quantum phenomena could be central to consciousness, providing a deeper level of processing that classical models cannot explain. To understand this, we must first grasp what quantum coherence means. In the quantum world, particles are not confined to single, definite states. Instead, they can exist in a superposition of possibility. It's only when the particle is observed or measured that it collapses into one definite state. This weird behavior where a particle can be in multiple places at once or exist in multiple states simultaneously is a hallmark of quantum mechanics, and it has no counterpart in classical physics. The idea that the brain could function in this quantum realm is both tantalizing and controversial. According to Orch-OR, the brain's microtubules, tiny, hollow protein structures that give neurons their shape and structure, are the site of quantum processing. These microtubules could, in theory, sustain quantum states that are crucial for consciousness. The theory suggests that, in a sense, consciousness might not arise from the brain's activity directly, but rather from these quantum effects, orchestrated by the brain's intricate architecture. This idea challenges the prevailing view of consciousness. Traditional neuroscience holds that consciousness is a product of neural activity, with neurons firing in complex patterns to generate thought and awareness. Consciousness, according to this model, emerges from the brain's physical structure, from the complex interactions of neurotransmitters and electrical signals passing through synapses. But the Orch-OR theory proposes a different possibility, that consciousness is not just a byproduct of neurons firing, but is instead rooted in the quantum realm, with the brain's microtubules serving as a conduit for quantum processing. The scientific implications of this theory are profound. If true, it would mean that the brain is operating on a level far beyond simple biological computation. Rather than just firing electrical impulses, the brain could be tapping into a vast quantum field, a quantum mind that exists not just in the brain, but potentially throughout the universe. To understand this better, we need to explore the basics of quantum biology. Quantum biology is a relatively new field, but it has already uncovered some surprising facts. In the natural world, quantum effects have been shown to play a role in phenomena as diverse as photosynthesis in plants, the magnetic navigation of birds, and even the sense of smell in humans. These discoveries have led some theorists to suggest that quantum mechanics is not just for the subatomic world, but might also influence biological processes at larger scales, including those in the brain. One of the most striking examples of quantum biology comes from the study of photosynthesis. In plants, light is absorbed by chlorophyll and converted into chemical energy. Recent experiments have shown that the process is incredibly efficient, far more so than classical models of energy transfer would predict. Researchers have found that quantum coherence, the same phenomenon that Penrose and Hameroff propose occurs in the brain, may help plants transfer energy with extraordinary precision. Quantum effects allow the plant to explore multiple energy pathways simultaneously, ensuring that it always finds the most efficient route for energy transfer. This discovery suggests that quantum processes may be at work in biological systems, even on a macroscopic scale. If quantum effects can influence biological processes as complex as photosynthesis, why not the brain? The idea that the brain could harness quantum coherence is not as far-fetched as it might seem. Our brains are made of atoms and molecules that obey the laws of quantum mechanics, and we know that certain parts of the brain, like the hippocampus, are involved in processing memory and learning areas that could benefit from the kind of parallel processing that quantum coherence allows. Could microtubules, the tiny protein filaments in neurons, be the brain's mechanism for tapping into this quantum realm? Penrose and Hameroff's theory suggests that the brain's microtubules provide a stable environment for quantum coherence to persist, even in the warm, noisy environment of the brain. Microtubules are part of the cytoskeleton in neurons, and they play a key role in maintaining cell shape, facilitating communication between cells and transporting material. But in Orch-OR, they take on a more critical role. They are quantum processors that enable the brain to access quantum information and use it to generate consciousness. If consciousness emerges from quantum processes in the brain, then it is not simply a product of the brain's classical functions. It is a deeper, more profound phenomenon that could be shaped by the quantum nature of the universe itself. This would mean that consciousness is not just a local phenomenon confined to our brains, but something potentially far more universal, connected to the fabric of reality at the most fundamental level. In this view, consciousness is not merely a byproduct of the brain, but a fundamental aspect of the quantum field itself, a force woven into the very fabric of existence. This idea stands in stark contrast to the classical view of the brain. In traditional neuroscience, the brain is a biological computer processing information through networks of neurons. Consciousness, in this view, is an emergent property of the brain's complexity, a product of its physical structure and neural. But if consciousness is rooted in quantum processes, it becomes something much more profound. It suggests that the brain's role is not to generate consciousness, but to channel it, like an antenna receiving a signal from a vast quantum field. If this is true, then consciousness is not just a private, isolated experience confined to our individual minds. It could be part of a universal consciousness linked to the quantum structure of the universe. This idea, while speculative, opens up the possibility that consciousness is not confined to the brain, or even to living beings. It could be a fundamental aspect of reality, one that exists throughout the universe, awaiting the right conditions to emerge. The contrast between the classical brain function model and the potential for quantum coherence in our cognitive processes could not be starker. The classical model confines consciousness to the brain, reducing it to the interactions of neurons and synapses. The quantum model, however, expands the possibility of consciousness, suggesting that it may be a fundamental aspect of reality itself, intricately linked to the very fabric of the cosmos. As we venture deeper into the unknown, exploring the frontiers of quantum mechanics and neuroscience, the potential implications of Orch-OR become increasingly profound. If consciousness arises from quantum processes, it could mean that our minds are connected to a vast, interconnected field, a field that may stretch across time and space, transcending the boundaries of individual experience. In this view, consciousness is not just a local phenomenon. It is a cosmic process woven into the very structure of the universe. While Orch-OR remains controversial and is still far from being proven, it challenges the very foundation of how we think about consciousness. If this theory holds true, it could change everything we know about the mind, reality, and the cosmos. But for now, it remains a tantalizing possibility, one that stretches the boundaries of both science and imagination. A playground for creation. Imagine standing at the edge of space, not the stars, the galaxies, or even the planets, but the very fabric of the universe itself. We've long thought of space as an emptiness, a void, a nothingness between the galaxies. But what if that nothing isn't empty at all? What if, beneath the stillness of space, there's a bustling, invisible world of potential, a quantum vacuum full of energy, fluctuations, and possibility? At the heart of modern physics lies an idea that seems almost impossible. The vacuum of space, the supposed emptiness, is far from empty. Instead, it's a seething cauldron of energy where particles and force fields spontaneously appear and disappear, existing for fractions of a second before vanishing again. This is the quantum vacuum, a place where the laws of classical physics break down and reality itself becomes a swirling sea of potential. In classical physics, the vacuum was imagined as empty, a blank slate upon which the universe unfolded. But in the quantum world, this picture is upended. The quantum vacuum isn't empty. It's alive with fluctuations, tiny bursts of energy that ripple through the fabric of space-time. It's a fundamental aspect of the universe, a cosmic foam where particles spontaneously appear and annihilate, where energy is not a static thing, but a dynamic, flowing presence. This seemingly paradoxical idea that space itself is filled with energy stems from the principles of quantum field theory. According to quantum mechanics, everything in the universe, from the tiniest particle to the largest galaxy, is made of fields that permeate space. These fields are not static, they are constantly fluctuating, moving in and out of existence. And while these fluctuations are imperceptible to our senses, they are the very foundation of reality, influencing the behavior of matter and energy on every scale. The most striking aspect of the quantum vacuum is that it is not merely the absence of matter, but a dynamic energy field that underpins all of existence. The vacuum is filled with particles, virtual particles that pop in and out of existence, momentarily coming into being only to disappear again. These particles are not real in the sense that we normally think of particles. They exist only as fleeting disturbances in the vacuum, but they are real enough to influence the behavior of matter and energy. In fact, they have a measurable impact on the world around us, influencing everything from the behavior of light to the structure of atoms. Now let's pause for a moment and think about the implications of this idea. If the quantum vacuum is a seething energetic field full of fluctuations and potential, what does this mean for consciousness? Could the mind, the very essence of awareness, be more than just a localized phenomenon that arises within the confines of the brain? Could consciousness itself be connected to this vast quantum field, drawn from it, resonating with it, and perhaps even shaped by it? The idea that consciousness might be a part of the quantum vacuum is as bold as it is fascinating. It suggests that our awareness is not confined to our brain, limited to our physical bodies, but is in some way woven into the very fabric of the universe itself. Just as the quantum vacuum is teeming with potential, perhaps consciousness too is part of this deeper, invisible structure, a field of awareness that transcends individual minds and connects us to the greater cosmos. This is where we begin to step into the realm of speculative, yet increasingly compelling thought. If consciousness is linked to the quantum vacuum, it could mean that our individual awareness is not just a byproduct of brain activity, but a localized expression of a far broader, universal field of potential. In this view, our thoughts, sense of being, our very awareness could be part of a greater, interconnected network of consciousness that spans the entire universe. Contrast this idea with the conventional view which sees consciousness as localized to the brain. According to this traditional model, consciousness is an emergent property of neural activity, something that arises from the intricate web of neurons and synapses firing in the brain. This view is supported by decades of research into brain activity, from the neural correlates of consciousness to the sophisticated imaging technologies that can track the brain's workings in real time. In this classical understanding, the mind is rooted in the brain, a local phenomenon that arises from the complexity of the neural network. But what if consciousness is not a local phenomenon? What if, instead of being generated by the brain, consciousness is tuned into the quantum field, like a radio picking up signals from a vast, universal source? In this view, the brain might not be the origin of consciousness, but simply the receiver, the filter that allows us to experience the quantum field in a particular way, a way that is unique to our individual minds. The idea that consciousness is connected to the quantum vacuum introduces a new level of interconnectedness. If consciousness is part of this field, then it could mean that all of us, all conscious beings, are interconnected through this deeper structure of reality. Our thoughts, our perceptions, might not be as isolated as we've been led to believe. Instead, they could be part of a shared field of awareness, influencing and being influenced by the quantum fluctuations that permeate the cosmos. This idea brings us closer to the ancient notions of a universal mind, a consciousness that transcends individual beings, connecting them all in a larger cosmic awareness. In Eastern philosophies like Vedanta and Buddhism, the concept of an all-encompassing consciousness is central. The idea that individual minds are not separate, but are part of a greater universal consciousness has long been a cornerstone of spiritual thought. What if modern physics, with its discovery of the quantum vacuum, is pointing towards something similar? Could it be that science and spirituality are converging on the idea that we are not isolated mind, but expressions of a deeper cosmic consciousness? This is not a claim that can be easily tested with current scientific tools. The quantum vacuum is not something we can see, measure, or touch directly. It's a concept that exists at the fringes of what we can observe, and it challenges many of the assumptions that have guided our understanding of reality. But the potential implications are profound. If consciousness is part of this quantum field, it would suggest that our awareness is not limited to our brains, but is part of a vast, interconnected network of consciousness stretching across space and time. And yet, this possibility brings with it profound questions. If consciousness is part of the quantum vacuum, what does this mean for the individual self? Are we truly separate beings, or is the sense of self an illusion, a temporary manifestation of a universal consciousness? What does it mean for life after death if consciousness is not confined to the brain, but part of a greater, infinite field? These questions are deeply philosophical, and while science may provide clues, they ultimately lead us to the edge of the unknown. What we do know is that the quantum vacuum is not empty, it is a seething sea of potential, full of energy and possibility. If consciousness is part of this field, then perhaps our awareness is not just a product of the brain, but a universal force tapping into the very fabric of reality. So we are left with a contrast: the classical view of consciousness as a localized phenomenon generated by the brain versus the possibility of consciousness as part of a much greater, universal field of potential. The quantum vacuum is a playground for creation, a field of infinite possibility. And perhaps, just perhaps, our consciousness is woven into that fabric, a wave in the quantum sea, connecting us to something far greater than ourselves. Our thoughts interconnected. Imagine for a moment that your thoughts, those fleeting sparks of awareness that define your experience of being, are not confined to the space inside your brain. Imagine that your memories, your sense of self, even your very consciousness could be interconnected in ways that transcend the boundaries of your body, your mind, and even time itself. It sounds like something out of science fiction, doesn't it? But what if I told you that quantum physics, the very science that governs the universe at its smallest scales, offers a clue that this idea is not entirely as far-fetched as it seems? This brings us to one of the most extraordinary phenomena in quantum mechanics: entanglement. Entanglement is a mind-boggling concept that challenges everything we know about space, time, and reality itself. It occurs when two particles become linked in such a way that the state of one particle is directly tied to the state of the other, no matter how far apart they are. The remarkable part? This connection remains intact even if the particles are separated by vast distances. Distances so far that, according to classical physics, no signal could travel between them fast enough to communicate. It's as if the particles are communicating instantaneously, defying the speed of light. This strange, non-local connection between particles is what Einstein famously called spooky action at a distance. To understand just how strange this is, let's break it down. In the classical view of the universe, we think of objects as being separate, discrete entities that only interact with each other when they are near. If two things are far apart, they are not connected. This makes sense, right? If I move my hand here, it only affects things that are close by. Nothing in the next room is influenced by the motion of my fingers. But quantum mechanics defies this intuition. When two particles are entangled, their states are connected in a way that transcends space. It doesn't matter whether the particles are on opposite sides of the universe. When something happens to one, it instantly affects the other. It's as if, somehow, the separation between them is an illusion. Now let's take this concept and imagine what it could mean for consciousness. What if thoughts, those intangible products of the brain, were not as separate as we think? What if they were entangled with each other, bound together by a quantum connection that we don't yet fully understand? Could memories, ideas, and emotions be linked across time and space, not just within the confines of one mind, but across mind, or even across the vast stretches of the cosmos? Could the phenomenon of quantum entanglement provide a bridge between individual consciousnesses? Could the interconnectedness of quantum particles point to a deeper, more profound level of connection between all minds, a kind of universal consciousness where thoughts, feelings, and awareness are not isolated but part of a larger, interconnected whole? This possibility is truly extraordinary. If quantum entanglement governs the behavior of particle, and if consciousness itself is somehow connected to the quantum field, then perhaps the boundaries between separate minds, separate experiences, are less solid than we assume. What if consciousness is not a private, localized experience, but a shared, universal field of awareness, one that connects all beings across time and space? Let's step back for a moment and consider the classical view of consciousness. In traditional neuroscience, consciousness is understood as an emergent property of the brain. It is personal, private. It arises from the electrochemical activity within the neurons of an individual's brain. The thoughts you have, the emotions you experience are uniquely yours, the result of your own brain's activity. Your consciousness is tied to your brain, and when you think, those thoughts are yours alone, disconnected from the thoughts or experiences of others. This understanding of consciousness fits neatly with our everyday experience. After all, when we think, it feels like our thoughts belong to us, and only us. They are personal, intimate, a reflection of our own subjective world. But what if this experience of separateness is an illusion, a limited perspective, shaped by the confines of our brain-bound perception? In contrast, if consciousness is indeed tied to the quantum field, then it is not a local, isolated phenomenon. Quantum entanglement suggests that everything in the universe is interconnected, that no part of reality is truly independent of the rest. If consciousness were part of this quantum field, it would mean that our thoughts, our awareness, are not separate from each other. Instead, they would be entangled, intertwined in a vast, non-local web of information and energy. In this view, the mind is not confined to the brain, but part of a cosmic consciousness shared across time, space, and individuals. But could this really be true? Is it possible that the thoughts we experience, our most personal, subjective awareness, are actually part of a universal field of consciousness, connected to the thoughts of others and perhaps even to the cosmos itself? And if so, what would this mean for our understanding of the mind, of reality, and of the nature of existence itself? Let's explore the implications of this idea. If our thoughts were entangled, interconnected across space and time, then the very nature of memory and identity would change. Memories, instead of being private experiences locked within our brains, could be part of a larger, shared consciousness. This might explain the phenomenon of déjà vu, the feeling that you've experienced something before, even though it's happening for the first time. Could it be that memories, thoughts, or experiences are shared, entangled, and sometimes cross over between minds? Consider also the idea of telepathy, the ability to read or influence another's thoughts without words or physical interaction. While telepathy has long been relegated to the realm of pseudoscience, quantum entanglement raises the question: could it be that minds are not as separate as we believe? Could the information in one mind somehow be instantly accessible to another, just as two entangled particles can influence each other, no matter how far apart they are? Even more profoundly, if consciousness is not local to the brain, then it could transcend the limits of space-time. The concept of non-locality, central to quantum entanglement, suggests that information can be shared instantly, faster than the speed of light. Could this mean that consciousness itself is not bound by time, and that past, present, and future thoughts are part of a unified field of awareness? In this view, consciousness is not constrained by linear time. It could be a timeless, non-local entity, existing beyond the boundaries of individual minds, and perhaps even beyond the boundaries of the universe itself. But as exhilarating as these possibilities are, they also raise many questions. How could such an interconnected, non-local consciousness operate? How could it influence our individual thoughts and actions? And if consciousness is entangled across minds, what does this mean for free will, personal agency, and the very nature of the self? Does this imply that our sense of being separate individuals is an illusion, a temporary experience in a much grander, interconnected reality? The contrast here is stark. On one side, we have the classical view of consciousness, a personal, private experience that arises from the brain's activity confined to the individual. On the other side, we have the possibility of quantum consciousness, a shared, universal experience that transcends the boundaries of the brain, connecting minds across time and space. The quantum possibilities of consciousness are not just mind-expanding, they also challenge our most fundamental assumptions about reality. If thoughts are entangled, if consciousness is universal, then the boundaries between self and other, past and future, mind and matter, all begin to blur. And as we venture deeper into this quantum realm, we find ourselves not only questioning the nature of consciousness, but the very nature of existence itself. Could it be that we are not isolated beings locked in our heads, but instead part of a greater, interconnected web of consciousness? A web where thoughts are not private, but shared across time and space? The idea is tantalizing, unsettling, and full of wonder. It forces us to reconsider everything we know about the mind, the universe, and our place in it. As we continue our exploration, we must ask ourselves, what if our thoughts are not just our own, but part of a larger quantum field of awareness? What if the mind is not a limited, localized phenomenon, but a universal consciousness entangled with the cosmos in ways we are only beginning to understand? Is your mind the universe? What if the universe you see, the world you experience with your sense, stars, the sky, the earth beneath your feet is not the whole What if everything you know about reality is just a projection, shadow of something much deeper, much grander? What if the very fabric of the universe is not what it seems, but instead a kind of hologram? It's a strange thought, one that challenges our basic understanding of reality. But the holographic principle is a real idea in modern physics, and it proposes just that the universe may not be three-dimensional at all, but rather a projection from a distant two-dimensional surface, much like a hologram. In this view, everything we perceive as real, the stars, the planets, and even the very fabric of space-time could be an illusion, projected from a flat surface in a way we don't yet fully understand. The holographic principle emerged in the 1990s from a confluence of ideas in quantum mechanics and black hole physics. It was first suggested by physicist Juan Maldacena, who realized that the mathematics of quantum gravity, the theory that describes how gravity works at the quantum level, pointed to the possibility that all the information contained in a region of space could be encoded on a lower dimensional surface, such as the event horizon of a black hole. But what does this mean for consciousness? Could it be that the universe is not a separate entity, something out there, but a projection of a deeper reality that includes us all? Could consciousness, far from being a localized phenomenon bound to individual minds, be intricately woven into the very fabric of the universe itself? The holographic principle, if true, suggests that the universe is not a passive backdrop to our lives, but an active, interactive projection, a living, dynamic reflection of a deeper reality. And if this is the case, it raises the possibility that our individual consciousnesses, the minds we experience as separate, confined to our brains, may not be as isolated as we think. Instead, they could be part of a larger interconnected field, a reflection of the greater cosmic mind that is projected into the world we see, the holographic universe. Let's pause and consider the implications of the holographic principle. It states that the three-dimensional universe we experience, the space we walk through, the objects we interact with, might actually be a projection of information encoded on a two-dimensional surface. In this view, the three dimensions we experience are not fundamental to reality, but rather arise from the interaction of information encoded on a distant boundary, much like how a hologram appears three-dimensional, but is actually a two-dimensional surface. One way to understand this is by thinking about a hologram. A hologram is an image that appears three-dimensional when illuminated by light, but is actually encoded on a flat surface, usually a piece of film or a digital medium. The image seems real, solid, and tangible, but in reality, it's just a projection. Similarly, the universe we experience might be a projection of information encoded on a distant, two-dimensional surface. This is where things get even more fascinating. If the universe is indeed a hologram, then everything we perceive, from the stars to the Earth to our very bodies, is a kind of illusion, a projection of information. But this doesn't mean that the universe is fake or unreal. On the contrary, it means that the universe is far more complex and interconnected than we could have ever imagined. The holographic principle suggests that the world we see and experience is not an independent, separate entity, but part of a larger dynamic process, one that transcends our understanding of space, time, and matter, consciousness, and the hologram now. Imagine what this means for consciousness. If the universe is a projection, then perhaps our minds too are part of this larger projection. What if consciousness is not confined to the brain, not limited to the individual mind, but is intricately woven into the very fabric of the universe itself? What if the mind is not an isolated entity, but an extension of the larger universal mind projected through each individual consciousness? The idea that consciousness is not limited to the brain, but part of a greater universal field, has been explored by philosophers and physicists alike. In this view, consciousness is not a private, personal experience, but part of a shared, interconnected field that transcends individual minds. This idea resonates with ancient spiritual traditions that have long spoken of a universal mind, a consciousness that permeates all of existence. In Vedanta, for example, the idea of Brahman, the universal consciousness, is central. The belief is that all individual consciousnesses are expressions of this greater cosmic mind, and this perspective is echoed in modern panpsychism, which proposes that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, inherent in all things. If the holographic principle is correct, then consciousness too might not be confined to the brain. It might be a projection of a deeper, universal consciousness, a mind that stretches across space and time, one that is reflected in each individual's experience. In this view, the brain acts not as the origin of consciousness, but as a receiver, a filter that tunes into the broader universal field of awareness. Just as a television antenna receives signals from a distant broadcast, perhaps our minds receive signals from a vast cosmic consciousness. Localized consciousness versus universal mind. The contrast here is profound. On one side, we have the classical view. Localized consciousness, a personal, private phenomenon that arises from the physical processes of the brain. In this model, consciousness is tied to the brain's activity, and when the brain ceases to function, so does consciousness. This view fits neatly with the materialist understanding of reality, where the mind is the product of biological process. On the other side, we have the idea that consciousness is universal, that it transcends the individual mind, connecting all minds as part of a greater, interconnected whole. In this view, consciousness is not confined to the brain, but is part of the very fabric of the universe itself. Just as the holographic principle suggests that the universe is a projection from a two-dimensional surface, perhaps consciousness too is a projection of a universal mind, one that transcends space, time, and individual existence. This idea that the mind is not separate from the universe, but part of a greater, cosmic consciousness challenges everything we know about reality. It suggests that the individual self is not as isolated as we believe, but is part of a larger, interconnected consciousness that stretches across the entire universe. In this view, the distinction between self and other, between individual mind and the universal mind, begins to dissolve. We are not separate entities, but expressions of the same universal consciousness. The implications for consciousness and reality. What does all this mean for our understanding of consciousness? If the universe is a hologram, if consciousness is not confined to the brain, but is part of a greater universal field, then it suggests that our minds are far more connected to the cosmos than we realize. The universe we experience is not separate from us. It is woven into us, part of a greater shared consciousness. In this view, our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions are not isolated to our individual minds, but are part of a larger cosmic process. This idea of a universal mind is both humbling and awe-inspiring. It suggests that we are not solitary beings, cut off from the universe, but are intimately connected to it, part of a vast, interconnected web consciousness. The distinction between mind and matter, between the observer and the observed, begins to blur. We are not just passive observers, we are active participants in it, shaping and being shaped by the universal consciousness that pervades all things. The holographic principle forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about reality. It suggests that what we perceive as solid, real, and separate may be nothing more than an illusion, a projection of information from a deeper, more fundamental reality. If consciousness is part of this projection, it implies that our minds are not just receivers of information, but creators of it, co-participants in the unfolding drama of the cosmos. The contrast is clear. On one side, we have the classical view of consciousness as a localized, brain-bound phenomenon. On the other side, we have the possibility of a universal consciousness woven into the very fabric of the universe, reflected in each individual mind. If the holographic principle is true, then perhaps the universe is not just a backdrop for our lives, but a projection of consciousness, shared and interconnected across time and space. As we continue our exploration, the idea that consciousness is part of a larger universal mind will continue to echo. Could it be that we are not isolated beings, but reflections of the greater cosmic consciousness? Could our minds be more than just projections, but active participants in the unfolding of the universe itself? These are the questions that will guide us as we journey deeper into the mysteries of mind, matter, and the cosmos. The new frontier of physics. Imagine, for a moment, that the consciousness you experience, your awareness, your thoughts, your very sense of being is not just a byproduct of the brain, but something much more profound. What if consciousness were not simply an emergent property of neural activity, but a fundamental field or dimension woven into the very fabric of reality itself? This idea may sound like a leap into speculative science fiction, but it's a question that's beginning to capture the attention of some of the world's leading physicists. Could consciousness be more like gravity or electromagnetism, not just something that arises from complexity, but a force that interacts with the quantum vacuum, shaping the very structure of the universe? At first glance, this may seem impossible. After all, we are taught that consciousness is a product of the brain, a result of the complex interactions between neurons, synapses, and chemical signals. But what if this view is incomplete? What if consciousness, instead of being merely the result of biological processes, is in fact a fundamental force in its own right, one that is interwoven with the deepest aspects of the quantum world? The brain and consciousness, a limited perspective. To explore this idea, we need to revisit the conventional understanding of consciousness. In traditional neuroscience, consciousness is seen as an emergent property of the brain. This means that consciousness arises when the brain reaches a certain level of complexity. Billions of neurons firing in intricate patterns generate awareness, thoughts, emotions, and experiences. The brain is a highly sophisticated biological organ, capable of processing information, interpreting sensory data, and creating a rich inner world of experience. This emergent view of consciousness has led to incredible advances in our understanding of the brain. Technologies like fMRI and EEG allow us to measure brain activity and correlate it with specific thoughts and behaviors. We can now identify the neural correlates of consciousness, the areas of the brain that light up when we engage in particular tasks or when we enter states of awareness. This view of consciousness as an emergent property has been incredibly powerful in helping us understand the biological basis of mind, but there's a catch. Despite all our advances, the hard problem of consciousness remains unsolved. Even though we can map brain activity, we still don't know why or how this activity gives rise to the rich, subjective experience of being alive. Why should a certain pattern of neurons firing feel like anything at all? Why should thought, sensation, and perception emerge from a cluster of cells? It's a question that continues to elude science, no matter how much we study the brain. This is where the idea of consciousness as a fundamental field comes into play. If consciousness were a field, something like gravity or electromagnetism, it would not be confined to the brain, nor would it be dependent on the complexity of neural network. Instead, it would be an intrinsic part of reality, a force that exists throughout the universe, interacting with matter and energy at the most fundamental level. In physics, we know that there are four fundamental forces that govern the behavior of the universe: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. These forces shape everything we experience, from the formation of galaxies to the behavior of subatomic particles. Each of these forces is described by a field, a region of space in which the force is felt. For example, the gravitational field describes how mass influences space-time, bending it and creating what we perceive as gravity. Similarly, the electromagnetic field governs how charged particles interact, shaping the behavior of light, electricity, and magnetism. These fields are not something we see directly, but they influence the world in profound ways. What if consciousness was similar? What if consciousness, like gravity or electromagnetism, is not just an emergent phenomenon, but a fundamental force that interacts with the quantum vacuum, influencing reality at the most basic level? This idea would radically change our understanding of consciousness. Instead of being something that arises from complex brain activity, consciousness would be an intrinsic aspect of the universe, a force that exists independently of the brain, but one that can interact with it, influencing thought, perception, and reality itself. The quantum vacuum, which we explored earlier, provides an intriguing backdrop for this idea. The quantum vacuum is not empty space, but a seething sea of energy filled with virtual particles and fluctuations. It is the very foundation of the quantum world, the underlying fabric of space-time. If consciousness is a fundamental field, perhaps it interacts with the quantum vacuum in a way that shapes our experience of reality, much like how electromagnetism shapes the behavior of charged particles. In this view, consciousness would be more than just a passive observer of reality. Instead, it would be a dynamic force that is actively involved in shaping the quantum field, influencing the way particles behave, and potentially even affecting the course of events at the quantum level. If consciousness is indeed a field, it could influence the probabilities that exist in the quantum vacuum, collapsing quantum superpositions into definite outcomes, much like the act of measurement does in quantum mechanics. This idea echoes some of the interpretations of quantum mechanics, like the Copenhagen interpretation, which suggests that the observer plays a critical role in the collapse of the wave function, the process by which potential outcomes in the quantum world become definite reality. In this view, the presence of consciousness itself is an active participant in the unfolding of reality, shaping the universe at the most fundamental level. Could it be that consciousness is entangled with the quantum vacuum in such a way that it not only receives information from the universe but also influences it? Could it be that consciousness is not just a product of the brain, but a field that is woven into the fabric of the cosmos, influencing the very structure of space-time and the behavior of particles at the quantum level? This perspective opens up extraordinary possibility. If consciousness is a field like gravity or electromagnetism, then it may be possible to tap into this field, to amplify it, to direct it, and to shape the very fabric of reality through focused intention, awareness, or meditation. The idea that consciousness is a force suggests that in some way we are not passive observers of the universe, but active participants, capable of influencing the world around us in ways we are only beginning to understand. Consciousness, emergent or fundamental? Now we return to the central contrast at the heart of this discussion. Is consciousness emergent, the product of complex neural networks in the brain, or is it fundamental, woven into the very fabric of reality itself? On one side, we have the emergent view of consciousness, the idea that the brain generates consciousness through the interactions of neurons and synapses. According to this view, consciousness arises when the brain reaches a certain level of complexity, and when the brain dies, so does consciousness. This model fits neatly with the materialist view of reality, where everything can be explained in terms of physical processes. On the other side, we have the fundamental view, the idea that consciousness is not confined to the brain, but is a universal field woven into the very structure. In this view, consciousness is not something that arises from complexity, but something that interacts with the quantum vacuum, shaping reality itself. Consciousness is not emergent, but intrinsic, a force like gravity or electromagnetism, active at every level of existence. This contrast raises deep philosophical and scientific questions. If consciousness is a fundamental field, what does that mean for our understanding of the mind, the self, and reality? Does this imply that consciousness is universal, shared by all living beings and perhaps even the entire universe? Could consciousness exist independent of the brain? And if so, what does that mean for life after death, or the continuity of consciousness beyond physical form? The implications of this idea are profound. If consciousness is a fundamental field, it means that we are not isolated individuals. Our minds are part of a larger, interconnected field of awareness transcending time, space, and physical boundaries. The boundaries between self and other, between mind and matter, begin to blur. And in that blur, we find the possibility of a universal consciousness, a field of awareness that spans the cosmos. Psi phenomena, proof of the quantum mind. For centuries, humanity has been fascinated by the possibility of extraordinary mental abilities that transcend the normal limits of human perception and action. We've all heard the stories, individuals who can read minds, predict the future, or move objects with nothing but the power of thought. these so-called psi-phenomena, telepathy, precognition, psychokinesis, have captivated our imagination and raised fundamental questions about the limits of the mind. Could these paranormal abilities be real? And if so, what does this suggest about the nature of consciousness itself? In the world of parapsychology, researchers have long attempted to study and understand psi phenomena, but the scientific community remains deeply skeptical. Despite decades of research, no conclusive evidence has emerged to demonstrate that abilities like telepathy, the ability to read minds, precognition, the ability to predict future events, or psychokinesis, the ability to move objects with the mind, are anything more than illusion, coincidence, or trickery. So, why should we even consider the possibility that these phenomena could be more than just fantasy? Could the quantum mind hold the key to understanding psi? What if, hidden beneath the surface of scientific skepticism, these extraordinary phenomena are not anomalies to be dismissed, but potential clues that point to a deeper quantum connection within our mind? Psi phenomena cover a broad range of phenomena, but three of the most well-known are telepathy, precognition, and psychokinesis. Let's break them down. Telepathy, the ability to read or transmit thoughts directly from one mind to another without any physical communication. Precognition, the ability to foresee future events, often in the form of dreams, visions, or gut feelings that later turn out to be true. Psychokinesis, the ability to move or manipulate physical objects using only the power of the mind, without any physical force. For centuries, stories of these abilities have appeared in folklore, mythology, and literature. But in the 20th century, researchers began attempting to study PSI phenomena scientifically. The goal was to determine whether these abilities could be proven through controlled experiments, and if they could, to understand the underlying mechanism. Over the years, there have been numerous experiments designed to test the validity of psi phenomena. One of the most famous was the Ganzfeld experiment, which tested telepathy by placing participants in isolated rooms with sensory deprivation equipment and having them attempt to transmit images or thoughts to a receiver in another room. While some studies claim to show statistically significant results, critics have pointed to flaws in the experimental design and questioned whether the effects could be explained by chance, sensory leakage, or other non-paranormal factors. Despite these challenges, the research continues. Some researchers, like Dean Radin, argue that there is strong statistical evidence suggesting that PSI phenomena are real. He and others point to the preliminary data from hundreds of studies showing that individuals appear to be able to sense or predict events in ways that defy conventional explanation. But the scientific community remains largely unconvinced. So, what does all this mean for our understanding of consciousness? Could it be that the unexplained abilities associated with PSI are not just psychological quirks or tricks, but instead manifestations of a deeper, more mysterious aspect of the mind? Could the quantum processes that govern the subatomic world, with their non-locality, entanglement, and superposition, be playing a role in these phenomena? Quantum connections to consciousness. The idea that psi phenomena might be tied to quantum processes isn't as far-fetched as it might seem. In fact, some physicists and researchers in the field of quantum consciousness have suggested that psi could be a manifestation of quantum mechanics at work in the brain. One of the most notable theories comes from Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, who proposed that consciousness arises from quantum processes within the brain's microtubules, tiny protein structures inside neurons. If consciousness is quantum in nature, it could theoretically influence or even be linked to the quantum world in ways that are not yet understood. If consciousness is quantum, then it stands to reason that non-local phenomena like telepathy or precognition could be more than just imaginative fantasy. Non-locality is a core feature of quantum mechanics. It's the idea that particles can be instantaneously connected to each other, no matter how far apart they are, in a phenomenon known as quantum entanglement. If consciousness is entangled with the quantum field, then perhaps ESI phenomena like telepathy and precognition could be expressions of this quantum connection. Let's explore how quantum processes might explain these phenomena. Telepathy. If consciousness is quantum in nature, then minds could be entangled, allowing them to communicate across space. Just as two entangled particles can influence each other instantaneously, perhaps human minds, or more specifically, their quantum consciousness could be connected in a similar way. This would explain how information could be transferred directly from one mind to another without any known form of physical communication. Precognition. The idea of knowing the future has puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries, but if consciousness is linked to the quantum field, then it might be able to access information from the future, a non-local quantum process that allows minds to tap into events that have not yet occurred. In quantum mechanics, particles exist in multiple states at once until they are observed. Could the human mind be tapping into these multiple potential futures, thereby gaining glimpses of what's to come? Psychokinesis. If consciousness is a quantum force, then it might be able to influence the behavior of particles and matter at the quantum level. Just as the observer effect in quantum mechanics suggests that observation collapses wave functions, perhaps consciousness could act as a force that interacts with matter at a fundamental level, influencing its behavior, even causing objects to move or change. Skepticism and the search for evidence. Despite these tantalizing possibilities, psi phenomena continue to be met with skepticism. Many scientists argue that the evidence for PSI is lacking and that the claims of paranormal abilities are either fraudulent or based on chance and misinterpretation. They point to the difficulties in replicating CSI experiments and the lack of a clear, consistent theory to explain how CSI could work within the framework of known physical laws. Moreover, CSI phenomena are difficult to test. The traditional scientific method requires reproducibility, and the inherently subjective nature of a psi experience's thoughts, feelings, and perceptions that can't be easily measured or quantified makes them difficult to study in controlled settings. Some argue that this makes ESI phenomena unfalsifiable, that is, they cannot be definitively proven or disproven using the current scientific method, and yet, despite this skepticism, the question remains, could there be something we're missing? Could PSI phenomena be real, and could they be connected to a deeper understanding of consciousness, one that transcends classical physics and delves into the quantum realm? The unexplained and the quantum connection. There are unexplained phenomena, such as remote viewing, precognitive dreams, and even the placebo effect that seem to suggest there is more to consciousness than we currently understand. The placebo effect, for instance, demonstrates the power of the mind to influence the body's physical state, and in some cases, it can even trigger real physiological changes. Could the mind be influencing the body in ways we don't yet fully understand? If the mind can influence the body in this way, why not the external world? As we look at the cutting-edge frontier of quantum consciousness, we see an emerging possibility that consciousness might not be an isolated phenomenon, but something much larger. Perhaps psi phenomena are a natural extension of the mind's connection to the quantum field. Perhaps our thoughts, emotions, and intentions can influence reality in ways we have yet to fully grasp. The contrast, then, is clear. On one side, we have the scientific skepticism surrounding PSI, with the argument that there is no conclusive evidence for these abilities and that they are more likely psychological quirks or illusions. On the other side, we have the potential for a quantum connection, where psi phenomena are not anomalies but a glimpse into the deeper nature of consciousness, where the boundaries of space, time, and individuality no longer apply. In the end, the quest for understanding psi phenomena is not just about proving or disproving the paranormal. It's about exploring the very nature of consciousness itself, and about uncovering the profound mysteries that lie at the intersection of mind, matter, and quantum reality. Whether PSI is real or not, the journey is one that invites us to expand our thinking and ask the most fundamental question of all. What is the true nature of consciousness? Thoughts as pre-existing energy, mapping the quantum field. What if the thoughts you experience, the ideas that arise seemingly out of nowhere, the intentions that guide your actions are not generated by your brain? What if they are not created? in your mind, but instead drawn from a deeper, more fundamental source? What if your thoughts already exist not as abstract concepts, but as potential energy embedded within the quantum vacuum, waiting for the right conditions to manifest? This speculative idea challenges the conventional view that the brain creates thoughts, emotions, and intentions. Instead, it proposes that consciousness is not the source of thoughts, but a receiver of information drawing from a vast, untapped quantum field that exists beyond the confines of the brain. In this view, the brain does not generate thought. It merely accesses them from a quantum reservoir, much like a radio receiving signals from a distant station. This concept is not just a flight of fancy. It draws on some of the most profound ideas in modern physics, including the nature of the quantum vacuum and the possibility that consciousness itself is part of the quantum field. Could thoughts, those intangible, ephemeral experiences we call mind, already exist in the quantum realm in a state of potentiality and simply await the right conditions to manifest in our conscious awareness? The brain, as the creator of thoughts. To understand this speculative idea, we must first revisit the traditional classical view of how thoughts are created. In the conventional model, the brain is seen as the generator of thoughts, feelings, and intentions. The mind is understood to emerge from the complex network of neurons firing in the brain. When neurons transmit electrical impulses, they create patterns of activity that we experience as thoughts, perceptions, and emotions. This model has been incredibly successful in explaining many aspects of consciousness. Through decades of research, we have mapped the brain's activity to specific tasks. Certain areas of the brain light up when we recognize faces, when we solve problems, or when we experience pleasure or pain. The brain has become the primary organ in our understanding of consciousness, the seat of thought, experience, and awareness. However, despite the tremendous success of this model, it fails to answer some of the most fundamental questions about consciousness. For example, it can explain how the brain processes sensory input, but it doesn't explain why this processing feels like anything at all, why a particular pattern of neural activity gives rise to the vivid, subjective experience of being. Why does awareness arise from neural interactions? Why should a particular firing of neurons in a brain create the sensation of thought or the feeling of being alive? The quantum vacuum and pre-existing thoughts. Now, let's step into a more speculative and daring possibility. What if consciousness and the thoughts it generates are not products of the brain's activity, but are pre-existing within the quantum field? What if thoughts are not created by the brain, but are part of a reservoir of potential embedded within the quantum vacuum, the fundamental, ever-present field of energy that underlies all of reality? In quantum physics, the vacuum is far from empty. Instead, it's a teeming, dynamic field where particles and energy fluctuate, constantly appearing and disappearing. This quantum vacuum is not a void, but a field of potential, where anything is possible, but nothing is definite until the right conditions arise. In this sense, the quantum vacuum could be seen as a storehouse of possibilities, a field in which all potential outcomes exist, waiting to be brought into reality. In this framework, thoughts and perhaps even intentions are not generated by the brain at all. Instead, they exist in a potential state within this quantum field, waiting to be actualized when the conditions are right. Just as particles in the quantum vacuum spontaneously appear and disappear, so too could thoughts and intentions emerge from this deeper field, taking form when they are needed or when the brain is in the right state to perceive them. Consciousness as a receiver, not a creator. If this is true, then consciousness is not the creator of thoughts, but a receiver, a conduit through which thoughts, intentions, and ideas are manifested from the quantum field. In this view, the brain functions more like a radio receiver. It tunes into the quantum vacuum, receiving the potential thoughts and ideas that already exist in the field and bringing them into awareness. Imagine the implications of this idea. If thoughts exist in a quantum reservoir awaiting the right conditions to surface, then the brain's role is not to create consciousness, but to access it. The brain becomes the instrument through which the quantum field of thought is made conscious. This would explain why we sometimes experience inspiration when ideas seem to come to us out of nowhere without conscious effort. What if, in those moments, the brain is simply tuning into the field of potential thoughts that already exist, bringing them into awareness? This theory is a radical departure from the traditional view, where consciousness is thought to arise exclusively from the brain's activity. If consciousness is a receiver rather than a creator, it would suggest that our individual minds are not separate, isolated entities, but part of a larger, interconnected field, a field that exists beyond space and time, where thoughts are not bound by the limits of our brain. Thoughts as energy, a quantum connection. In the quantum realm, energy is not confined to individual objects or systems. It is distributed throughout the universe, fluctuating in complex, non-local ways. This is where the idea of non-locality comes into play. In quantum mechanics, non-locality refers to the phenomenon in which particles can be instantaneously connected, regardless of the distance between them. In a sense, they are aware of each other, regardless of the space between them. Could the same principle apply to consciousness? Could thoughts, instead of being confined to individual minds, be part of a quantum field that connects all minds, all experiences, and all thoughts? If consciousness is linked to the quantum field, then thoughts might not be purely personal or private experiences. Instead, they could be shared or entangled across minds. In this framework, the brain acts as a receiver, tuning into a field of potential thoughts that are not bound by the limitations of time, space, or individuality. Thoughts could exist as quantum energy in a potential state, awaiting the right conditions to manifest in the conscious mind. This would explain phenomena like creative inspiration, intuitive insight, or even synchronicities, where ideas seem to come from an outside source or where events appear to align in mysterious ways. What if our minds are simply accessing the vast quantum field of potential, drawing from a source that is not limited to our own individual experience, but is part of a universal field of brain as creator versus thought from a quantum reservoir? The contrast between these two perspectives is stark. On one side, we have the traditional view, the brain as the creator of thoughts, where consciousness is a byproduct of neural activity. This view is supported by much of modern neuroscience, which has mapped the brain's activity to specific thoughts and behaviors. In this model, the brain is the generator of consciousness, and when the brain dies, consciousness ceases. On the other side, we have the speculative view that consciousness is not created by the brain, but accessed from a quantum reservoir of potential thoughts embedded within the quantum vacuum. In this model, the brain is the receiver of consciousness, drawing from a field of energy and possibility that exists beyond the individual mind. Thoughts are not generated by the brain, they are simply brought into awareness when the brain tunes into the quantum field. This contrast raises profound questions about the nature of reality, the mind, and the universe. If consciousness is a field and thoughts are pre-existing within the quantum vacuum, what does this mean for the concept of individuality? Are we truly separate minds, or are we part of a larger universal consciousness, with individual thoughts simply arising from a deeper, collective field? As we contemplate these ideas, we are left with more questions than answers. If thoughts exist in a quantum reservoir, what does this imply about free will? Do we have control over the thoughts we access, or are they part of a larger deterministic field of possibility? And if consciousness is not the product of the brain, what happens to it when the brain dies? While these questions remain unanswered, the speculation offers a tantalizing glimpse into the true nature of consciousness. Could it be that the thoughts you experience are not your own creations, but part of a greater, interconnected field of energy? Could it be that consciousness is not localized in the brain, but is a universal force intertwined with the very fabric, expanding conscious beyond time and space? What if your mind, your conscious, is not just a product of your brain, not limited to your physical body, but connected to something much larger, something infinite? What if consciousness, far from being a localized phenomenon confined to your mind, is a cosmic force woven into the very fabric of the universe itself? This idea is as old as philosophy itself, with countless thinkers throughout history pondering the nature of mind, reality, and the cosmos. But today, thanks to quantum physics and the holographic model of the universe, we may be standing at the edge of a new understanding, one that suggests that consciousness may transcend not only our individual brains, but the very limitations of space and time. Could consciousness, as a fundamental aspect of reality, be non-local, not bound by physical space, not limited to the brain or the body, but part of a vast universal field? And if so, could this field allow consciousness to stretch beyond the limits of time, enabling experiences that transcend the here and now, perhaps even persisting beyond death itself? The implications of this idea are mind-boggling, but they are rooted in the strange, non-intuitive world of quantum mechanics and the holographic model of the universe, and non-locality. To understand this, we need to revisit the holographic principle, the idea that the entire universe could be a projection from a distant two-dimensional surface. In this model, everything we perceive as three-dimensional, all the stars, planets, galaxies, and even space-time itself, is simply an illusion, projected from a deeper, more fundamental reality. The universe, in this view, is a hologram. The key holographic principle has profound implications for our understanding of consciousness. If the universe is a projection from a higher dimensional surface, then consciousness too may not be confined to our physical brain. It could be woven into the very fabric of the cosmos, linked to this deeper quantum reality and capable of transcending space and time. Non-locality is a key concept in quantum mechanics that can help us understand how consciousness might transcend the limitations of space. In the quantum realm, particles can become entangled, meaning that their states are connected in such a way that a change in one particle's state will instantaneously affect the other, regardless of the distance between. This is a manifestation of non-locality, the idea that particles can be instantaneously connected, bypassing the constraints of space and time. If consciousness is tied to the quantum vacuum, it might not be confined to the individual brain, but part of a non-local field of awareness that spans the entire universe. In this view, consciousness is not something that resides solely within us. Rather, it is a universal force, a field of awareness that extends beyond the confines of the body, connecting all beings, all minds, across time and space. The timeless nature of consciousness. If consciousness is truly non-local, if it is embedded in the quantum field, then it may not be bound by time in the way we understand it. Our everyday experience of time is linear. The past leads to the present, and the present leads to the future. But what if time, as we know it, is just an illusion? What if the timeless nature of consciousness allows it to transcend this linear flow of time? In the quantum realm, time is not a constant, predictable force. Particles do not always behave according to a clear timeline. Their states are often indeterminate, existing in multiple possibilities until they are observed. Could consciousness, as part of this quantum realm, also exist outside the constraints of linear time? Could it be that our thoughts, experiences, and awareness are not tied to a single moment in time, but exist as part of a timeless field, a field that stretches across all of reality? One way to think about this is through the concept of eternalism, a philosophical view that suggests that all moments in time, past, present, and future, are equally real. In this view, time is not a river that flows from the past to the future, but rather a block where all events exist simultaneously. If consciousness is part of this timeless field, then perhaps our awareness is not confined to the present moment, but is capable of experiencing all moments of time simultaneously. Consciousness and the continuity of being. This idea has profound implications for the nature of life and death. If consciousness is not bound by time, if it is a non-local quantum field, then it might be possible for consciousness to persist beyond physical death. The idea that consciousness could continue to exist after the death of the body is one that has been explored by many spiritual traditions, but it is also one that some physicists are beginning to take seriously in light of quantum mechanics. The quantum field is often described as a sea of potentiality, where particles pop in and out of existence, appearing and disappearing without any clear cause or reason. In this view, consciousness might not be a localized individual phenomenon, but rather a continuum, something that persists beyond the body, beyond time, and beyond space. If consciousness is connected to the quantum field, then it might be able to exist beyond the limitations of the body. Rather than being tied to a specific brain, it could be part of a universal awareness, a field that continues to exist after death, awaiting the right conditions to be reawakened. This idea is reminiscent of the concept of reincarnation found in many spiritual traditions, where consciousness is said to continue after death, taking on new forms and new lives. Could it be that the mind, the true essence of consciousness, is infinite, and that death is not the end, but rather a trance of consciousness, part of the quantum? Perhaps the end of the body is not the... Instead, it might be a transition to another state of awareness, a shift in the quantum field, where consciousness is freed from the physical constraints of the body. Localized human mind versus universal consciousness. The contrast here is stark. On one side, we have the localized human mind, which arises from the brain's neural activity. In this model, consciousness is confined to the individual, and when the brain ceases to function, consciousness ends. This view fits neatly within the classical, materialist understanding of reality, the idea that mind and body are inseparable, and that consciousness is a byproduct of physical processing. On the other side, we have the universal, infinite mind, which is part of the quantum field and extends beyond space and time. In this view, consciousness is not confined to the brain, but is a fundamental force woven into the very fabric of the cosmos. The individual mind is not beyond time and space. The possibility that consciousness transcends space and time opens up a new frontier for understanding the mind. If consciousness is truly a quantum field, part of the fabric of the universe, then it suggests that our awareness is not bound by the limitations of our physical bodies. It hints at a greater consciousness, a mind that stretches across the cosmos, beyond time, beyond space, and beyond death. What if the experiences we call life and death are simply temporary states in an endless journey of consciousness? If consciousness is not localized, if it is woven into the fabric of the universe, then perhaps we are not born, nor do we die in the traditional sense. Perhaps we are part of an infinite, ongoing cosmic awareness, one that transcends the physical world and continues on beyond time and space for eternity. The idea of the infinite mind raises more questions than answers. But in these questions lie profound possibilities that stretch our understanding of reality, consciousness, and the universe itself. And as we delve deeper into these mysteries, we begin to glimpse the true potential of the human mind, the infinite possibilities of consciousness, and the vast interconnected universe of which we are a part, the uncharted territory of consciousness. As we conclude this exploration into the nature of consciousness, we are left with more questions than answers. The vast, uncharted territory of the mind and its potential connection to the quantum world remains as enigmatic and mysterious as ever. Throughout this journey, we've ventured into some of the deepest and most profound questions of human existence. What is consciousness? Is it a byproduct of the brain, or is it a force woven into the very fabric of reality itself? Can the thoughts we experience, the ideas that seem to arise out of nowhere, be pre-existing in the quantum vacuum, waiting to be unlocked? And if consciousness is part of the quantum field, does it transcend time, space, and even death? These questions challenge the very foundations of science, philosophy, and spirituality. They force us to reconsider our place in the universe and to reflect on the extraordinary nature of the mind itself. But as much as we've learned, we find that the more we probe the mysteries of consciousness, the more elusive it becomes. The uncharted nature of consciousness. For centuries, consciousness has been a subject of fascination and frustration. Philosophers have pondered its nature for millennia. Scientists have searched for its origins for decades, and yet, despite all our advances, we are still far from understanding the true nature of the mind. We know much about how the brain works, about its structure, its processes, and its neural activity, We can measure brain waves, map activity in different regions, and even alter states of consciousness through electrical stimulation or chemical. Yet, despite all this knowledge, we still cannot fully explain why this activity generates awareness, why the firing of neurons results in the subjective experience of being alive. Consciousness remains a mystery, and perhaps it will always remain so at least in the way we traditionally think about. For all the progress we've made, consciousness resists definition, defies explanation, and ultimately invites us to explore rather than understand in the traditional sense. It's as though we are standing at the threshold of a vast, hidden world, one that can be felt, experienced, and even mapped to some extent, but one that can never be fully grasped with the limited tools of science, philosophy, or even language. But what if that is the beauty of it? What if the mystery of consciousness is not something to be solved, but something to be lived, something to be felt and experienced as we continue our journey through existence? What if, rather than defining it, we are meant to explore its infinite dimensions and possibilities, to ask the questions, to wonder, and to allow the mystery to unfold in ways we cannot yet comprehend? A field of infinite potential. Perhaps, in the end, the true nature of consciousness is not something that can be explained, but something that must be experienced in the deepest sense. As we have explored, the quantum vacuum, the fabric of space-time, that underlies all of reality, may hold the answers to some of these profound questions. It is not empty space as we once thought, but a field of potential, a quantum ocean filled with fluctuations, particles, and energy, all interacting with each other in ways we are only beginning to understand. The quantum vacuum is a reservoir of possibilities where everything exists in potential form and where reality is constantly shifting and changing, shaped by the observer. If consciousness is indeed part of the quantum field, as some theories suggest, then our thoughts, our intentions, and even our very sense of self may not be generated by the brain at all, but accessed from this quantum sea. Our minds may not be isolated individual entities, but part of a universal consciousness connected to the very fabric of existence itself. This opens up an entirely new way of thinking about the mind and its relationship to the world. Instead of seeing consciousness as something created within the brain, we can begin to see it as a receiver, a vessel that draws from a deeper, universal source. Our thoughts, emotions, and perceptions may not be isolated events within the confines of our own minds, but part of a larger, interconnected field of awareness that transcends space, time, and even death. As we stand at the intersection of neuroscience, quantum physics, and philosophy, we find ourselves confronted by the enormity of the unknown. Is consciousness a product of the brain, as traditional science suggests, or is it something more, something universal, connected to the quantum field that underlies all of reality? Could consciousness be timeless, not bound by the physical limitations of the brain, but existing beyond the confines of space and time? Could it persist beyond death, continuing its journey in ways we can't yet imagine? These questions take us into the uncharted territory of human existence, where science and philosophy blur together, where the boundaries between mind, matter, and the cosmos begin to dissolve. What we do know is that consciousness is a mystery, a profound living mystery that invites us to explore and ponder, not to define or contain. It is a force that shapes our reality, that defines our experience of the world, and that connects us to the very fabric of the universe. But beyond that, we are left to wonder, what is consciousness? Where does it come from, and where does it go? What is its relationship to the quantum field, to the universe, and to the very nature of existence? As science continues to probe the mysteries of consciousness, we are reminded that we are still at the very beginning of a long journey. We may never fully understand the mind, but the quest to do so will continue to shape our understanding of ourselves, the universe, and the nature of reality itself. Whether consciousness is a product of the brain or a fundamental force, whether it is local or non-local, it remains a force that cannot be ignored. It is the most profound mystery we face, and yet it is also the most personal, the most intimate. It is the very essence of who we are. What is clear, however, is that we are on the precipice of something extraordinary. As our understanding of quantum mechanics deepens, as we probe the quantum vacuum, as we explore the frontiers of consciousness, we may begin to unlock secrets that will transform our view of the mind, reality, and the universe itself. And so, we end with a question, one that invites us to look beyond the limits of what we know and reach into the unknown. What if the thoughts we have today have already existed in the quantum vacuum, waiting for us to unlock their secrets? What if our minds, far from being isolated, are connected to a vast field of potential, where every thought, every idea, every intention is already out there waiting for us to bring it into reality? As we continue to explore the uncharted territory of consciousness, we are reminded that this journey is far from over. We are only scratching the surface, and the possibilities are infinite. Whether science, philosophy, or spirituality holds the key to unlocking the secrets of the mind, one thing is certain: the mystery of consciousness is one that will continue to shape our understanding of the universe for generations to come. The road ahead is still uncharted, and the questions remain open. But in that openness lies the potential for discovery, for awe, and for a deeper understanding of the vast, interconnected reality in which we exist. In the end, the mystery of consciousness may never be fully answered, but that may be the very thing that makes it so profound. To ponder the nature of the mind, to ask these deep, existential questions, is to step into the great unknown. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all, that the very act of asking the question, of seeking to understand, is itself a manifestation of the infinite potential of consciousness. What if we never find the answer? What if, in the end, the question itself is the answer, the great, infinite field of awareness, constantly unfolding, constantly seeking, constantly wondering? Perhaps the greatest discovery of all is not the answer, but the journey itself. And so, we leave you with this thought: the mystery of consciousness is not something to be solved. It is something to be lived, explored, and pondered for as long as we are capable of thought. For as long as we have questions, we have the potential to unlock the secrets of the universe, and in that perhaps we find the greatest mystery of all.